The tomato sauce flew straight toward my cream-colored dress. The thick red liquid spread across the fabric like a stain of shame for everyone to see. Skylar Rose, my 12-year-old granddaughter, looked at me with a mischievous smile, holding the empty ladle in her small hands. The silence lasted only 2 seconds before the entire room erupted in laughter. But that wasn't the worst part. The impact had been so sudden that my mother's pearl necklace snapped. I watched in horror as dozens of perfect white pearls scattered across the marble floor of the school auditorium, rolling under chairs and disappearing into corners like my dignity being torn apart piece by piece. "Skylar, you're terrible," my daughter-in-law, Tanisha Hayes Dupree, screamed between bursts of laughter, but there was no hint of reprimand in her voice. Instead, she seemed proud of what her daughter had done. She even pulled out her phone to record the aftermath, probably for her fitness Instagram, where she loved showing off their perfect family moments. My son Marcus covered his mouth to hide his amusement, but his eyes sparkled with joy. The other guests, teachers, parents, school administrators, pointed at my ruined dress and whispered comments they thought I couldn't hear. As a retired nurse, I'd learned to read people's expressions, and what I saw wasn't sympathy. It was entertainment. You ever notice how family can be the cruelest? How the people who should love you most can make you feel the smallest? "Grandma Rosa said you don't belong here," Skylar murmured, with that false innocence that only a manipulated child can display. Her words echoed in my ears like church bells on a Sunday morning, clear and impossible to ignore. Tanisha didn't deny anything. She just kept laughing while serving more pasta, acting as if ruining a 62-year-old woman's dress was the perfect entertainment for her daughter's middle school graduation party. A graduation I had secretly paid for, the venue, the catering, even Skylar's new dress. I sat in that uncomfortable folding chair, feeling the sauce seeping through the fabric and staining the dress I had bought specifically for this occasion. I spent $180 on that dress, money I really couldn't afford. But I did it because I thought that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I thought that maybe my family would treat me with respect at least once in my life. How naive I had been. How foolish to believe that anything had changed after all these years of humiliations and disrespect. My hands trembled slightly as I got up from the chair, stepping carefully around the scattered pearls. But I kept my head high. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here. Not in front of all these strangers who now had a funny story to tell in their own homes about the old woman who was humiliated at a graduation party. "Aren't you going to say something, Grandma?" Skylar asked with that sweet voice that adults find adorable, but which I recognized as pure poison. The child had been trained for this. Someone had taught her exactly what to say and when to say it. My eyes drifted toward Tanisha, who continued to smile while cutting more garlic bread, completely satisfied with the show she had orchestrated. As a former nurse, I knew manipulation when I saw it. This wasn't an accident. This was a performance. "No, sweetheart," I replied with a voice so calm it surprised even me. "I have nothing to say." I headed toward the school's restroom to find something to clean myself with. But I knew the damage was done. The dress was ruined, my dignity trampled, and my heart broken once more by the family that was supposed to love me. In the restroom, while I futilely scrubbed at the red stains with a damp paper towel, I could hear the laughter continuing in the auditorium. Someone had turned the music louder, as if they wanted to celebrate my humiliation with a soundtrack included. My hands moved automatically, cleaning and scrubbing, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was remembering all the times I had come to these family gatherings with hope in my heart. All the times I brought gifts no one appreciated, food no one ate, and love no one wanted to receive. For years I believed the problem was me, that maybe I didn't know how to approach my own family, that maybe I was too old or too boring to fit into their modern lives. But standing there in that restroom with my ruined dress and my pride in pieces, I finally understood the truth I had been denying for so many years. They didn't want me there. They never had. I was just a family obligation they tolerated out of custom, a burden they had to endure on special dates because it was the right thing to do. The music from the auditorium got louder and the voices more cheerful. It was as if my absence had improved the party, as if they could finally relax and truly have fun now that the uncomfortable old woman was out of sight. Skylar was probably getting congratulations for her prank, and Tanisha was telling the story repeatedly, adding dramatic details each time she repeated it. I left the paper towel on the counter and headed toward the exit. No one noticed when I picked up my purse and keys. No one said goodbye when I opened the door. No one asked if I needed help or if I was okay. I just walked out of that school in silence with my stained dress and my heart finally clear about what I had to do. The cool evening air hit my face as I reached my car. My hands shook slightly as I searched for my keys in my purse. But it wasn't from sadness. It was something different. It was the feeling of someone who had finally awakened after a very long and painful sleep. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me had dry eyes and an expression I hadn't seen in years. Determination. That's what I saw in my reflection. Pure, cold determination, like December ice. This wasn't the first time my family had treated me like I was invisible, and what I was about to discover would make tonight's humiliation look like child's play. As I drove back to my small apartment, memories began to flow like water from a broken dam. Every week for the past 6 years had been a repetition of the same humiliating pattern. The invitations always came at the last minute, as if I were an afterthought. "Rosa, come have dinner here on Sunday. Nothing special, just family." But I knew it was never anything special for them. I was the filler, the person who completed the head count so the table didn't look so empty. I always arrived with something homemade, a dessert that took me hours to prepare, or an appetizer I had seen in a magazine and wanted to try. I spent between $30 and $50 each time on ingredients I really couldn't afford, waking up at 5 in the morning to have everything ready, and each time it was the same thing. They left my food in a corner of the table while everyone else rushed to the main dish brought by some other guest. "This looks so delicious," they would say, completely ignoring my contribution. By the end of the afternoon, my container always came home with me, almost untouched, with only 1 or 2 portions removed out of courtesy. I remembered Marcus's birthday last year. I spent $250 I didn't have on a medical equipment toolkit he had mentioned wanting for his work as a medical technician. I took 2 buses to get to the medical supply store downtown because I didn't have money for a taxi, and arrived home with swollen feet and a heart full of expectation. When it came time to open gifts, Marcus unwrapped mine last, almost as a formality. "Thanks, Mom," he mumbled without even looking properly at the toolkit, and left it on the table to continue with Tanisha's gift. She had bought him a smartwatch that cost half of what I had spent, but he put it on immediately and spent the rest of the afternoon showing it off to all the guests. My toolkit was forgotten among the crumpled wrapping paper and used napkins. No one else looked at it. No one asked how much it cost or where I'd gotten it. For them, it was just another gift from old Rosa, something they expected to receive. But it didn't generate any real emotion or gratitude. Skylar's celebrations were even worse. Every time she had a school play or a swimming competition, I was the only one who didn't receive a formal invitation. I would find out by chance when I heard Marcus mentioning it on the phone, and I would have to timidly ask if I could go. "Sure, Mom, you can come if you want," he always said, with that tone that made it clear my presence was optional and not particularly desired. I arrived at those events with flowers I had bought with grocery money, sitting in the back row while Marcus and Tanisha took the best seats up front. When Skylar went on stage or stepped up to the podium, I clapped louder than anyone, my heart overflowing with pride for my only granddaughter. But afterward, when everyone gathered for family photos, I was always left out of the frame. "It's just for parents," Tanisha would explain with that fake smile she had perfected over the years. I would step aside and watch them pose for dozens of photos that they would later post on social media. In none of those images was there any evidence that Skylar had a grandmother who adored her and who had been there supporting her from the stands. The Sunday family gatherings at Marcus's house were exercises in emotional endurance. I arrived punctually at noon, as I had always been taught was right, but the meal was never ready before 3 p.m. While I waited, I sat in the living room watching Marcus play video games with Skylar or Tanisha, talking on the phone with her friends about plans that didn't include me. "Can I help with anything in the kitchen?" I always offered, but Tanisha would reject me with a wave of her hand. "Don't worry, Rosa, everything's under control." So I sat there for hours, feeling like an old piece of furniture that no one wanted, but no one dared throw away either. When they finally served the food, I always ended up sitting in the most uncomfortable chair, usually the one near the kitchen, so I could help serve if needed. The conversations flowed around my presence like water around a rock. They talked about people I didn't know, places I hadn't been, plans that didn't include me. "Remember when we went to that new restaurant last month?" Marcus would ask Tanisha, and she would start telling a detailed story about a family dinner I hadn't been invited to. I chewed my food in silence, wondering why I kept going to these gatherings that only served to remind me how little I mattered in their lives. But here's what I didn't know then. The first time Marcus asked me for money, I was 58 years old and had just been widowed. My husband, Robert Bobby Dupree, died of a heart attack while working in the garden on an April morning, leaving me with a small inheritance and a loneliness I thought my children would fill. How wrong I was. Marcus came to my house 3 weeks after the funeral, with red eyes and a story about problems at work. "Mom, I need $5,000. Temporary. I swear I'll pay you back in 2 months." He looked so desperate, so vulnerable that I couldn't say no. That money came from Robert's life insurance, money I had planned to use to fix the leaking roof and replace the old windows in the house. The 2 months turned into 6, then a year. When I finally dared to ask about the money, Marcus got angry with me. "Seriously, you're going to pressure me for money when you just became a widow? I thought you wanted to help your family." The guilt consumed me for weeks. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe a good mother shouldn't worry about money when her son was in trouble. That was just the first of many emergencies that required my financial help. The next year, he needed $3,500 to pay off a credit card debt. Then it was $500 to pay the down payment on a bigger apartment, then $200 to fix the car. Each time he promised to pay me back, and each time I ended up waiting months without seeing a single dollar returned. But what hurt me most wasn't losing the money. It was how they treated me after each loan. Instead of gratitude, I received indifference. Instead of respect, I received that condescending attitude that clearly said they expected my help as if it were their right, not my generosity. I vividly remember the day Tanisha asked me to co-sign for their first house. She was only 25 years old and didn't have enough credit history. "Rosa, we need you to sign these papers. It's just a formality. You won't have to pay anything. We just need your name so the bank will approve the loan." They took me to the bank dressed in my best suit, the same one I had worn to Robert's funeral. The loan officer explained the contract terms, but I barely understood half of what he was saying. Marcus and Tanisha assured me it was routine, that thousands of parents did the same for their children every day. "Sign here, Mom. Trust us." And I signed. I signed because I wanted to believe they finally saw me as an important part of their lives. I signed because I thought maybe this would make them value me more. I signed because a naive part of me believed this would turn me into a grandmother Skylar would remember fondly when she was older. For the first 2 years, everything seemed to be going well. Marcus had a stable job at a local medical equipment company, and Tanisha worked part-time at a retail store. They made their monthly payments without problems, and I felt proud that I'd been able to help them get their first house. I finally had something concrete I had done for my family, something that really mattered. But then Marcus lost his job. The company he worked for went bankrupt during the economic crisis, leaving dozens of employees without work and without the benefits they had been promised. Suddenly, mortgage payments became impossible to keep up with. I found out about the situation, not because they told me directly, but because the bank called me as the co-signer. "Ms. Dupree, the payments for the property you co-signed on Elmwood Avenue are 3 months behind. If they're not brought current immediately, we'll have to proceed with foreclosure." The bank employee's voice was cold and professional, but her words hit me like a hammer blow to the chest. When I confronted Marcus about the situation, he yelled at me for the first time in his adult life. "It's not my fault I lost my job. Do you think I wanted this to happen? And now you're pressuring me like I'm some kind of criminal." Tanisha stood behind him with Skylar in her arms, looking at me as if I were responsible for all their problems. That night, I went home and calculated exactly how much money I had saved. If I paid the 3 months of overdue mortgage payments, I would have less than $200 left in my savings account. But if I didn't pay, they would lose the house and my credit would be ruined forever. I had no choice. I paid the $200 they owed, practically emptying all my emergency reserves. They thanked me. Marcus mumbled a thank you without looking me in the eyes. Tanisha didn't even do that. They acted as if it were my obligation to pay, as if signing as a cosigner automatically made me responsible for their financial mistakes. And the worst part was that technically, they were right. The following months were hell with constant calls from the bank. Every time Marcus and Tanisha were late with a payment, I was the first to find out. My phone would ring at 8 a.m. with bank employees reminding me of my contractual obligations, as if I were a professional debtor instead of a mother who wanted to help her son. I had to get a second job cleaning offices at night to cover the payments when they couldn't. I would arrive home at 11 p.m. with back pain and hands cracked from the chemicals, all to keep afloat a house where I wasn't welcome. Because that was the biggest insult. After all the money I had invested, after risking my financial stability for them, I was still treated like a stranger visitor when I went to their house. They never offered me a key. They never said, "This is your house too." They never acknowledged that without my sacrifice, they would be living in a rental apartment or back with their parents. The situation got worse when they decided to renovate the kitchen. "It's an investment," Marcus explained, when he asked me for another $5,000 for new cabinets and appliances. "This will increase the property value." I knew it was a lie. I knew they just wanted a better kitchen and expected me to pay for it. But I felt so trapped at that point that I agreed. I worked double shifts for 6 months to raise that money. My feet swelled so much I had to sleep with my legs elevated, and I developed chronic back pain that still bothers me today. All to pay for the wooden cabinets Tanisha had seen in a magazine and decided she needed in her kitchen. The inauguration of the new kitchen was a party for 30 people I wasn't invited to. I found out through the photos Marcus posted on Facebook, where everyone seemed to be toasting and celebrating the kitchen I had paid for. In one of the photos, Tanisha posed proudly next to the new granite island with a wine glass in her hand and a radiant smile. That night, I called Marcus to ask why I hadn't been invited. "We didn't think you'd be interested, Mom. You know, you don't like crowds." It was a lie, and we both knew it. The truth was that my presence would have been uncomfortable for them. How could they show off their new kitchen in front of their friends if the woman who actually paid for it was there to remind them of reality? It was the first time I really considered the possibility that my family was using me. But even then, even with all the evidence before my eyes, I found ways to justify their behavior. "They're young," I told myself. "They don't understand the value of money yet. One day they'll thank me properly." How blind I was, so desperate to be loved that I confused being exploited with being needed. But what I was about to discover would shatter every illusion I had left about my so-called loving family. Ever notice how the people who hurt us most are often family? What's your experience with toxic family members? Tell me in the comments below. The moment that changed everything forever was when Skylar turned 7 years old. I had planned that celebration for months, saving every penny I could to buy the perfect gift for her. I knew that Skylar loved horses, so I spent $300 on a themed dollhouse I had seen at the downtown toy store. It was a beautiful piece with miniature stables, small horses of different colors, and even tiny leather saddles. The night before her birthday, I worked until 2 a.m., wrapping each piece separately so Skylar would have many little presents to open. I used gold paper I had bought especially for the occasion and tied each package with pink ribbons that matched the decoration I knew Tanisha had chosen for the party. I arrived at the celebration with my arms full of perfectly wrapped packages, excited to see Skylar's face when she discovered what was inside. But from the moment I crossed the door, I knew something was different. Tanisha greeted me with a tense smile, and Marcus avoided making eye contact with me completely. "Rosa, how nice that you came," Tanisha said, with that sweet fake voice she had perfected over the years. "You can put the gifts over there on that table." She pointed to a small table in the corner, far from where all the other gifts were piled. It was evident that my gifts were being segregated from the rest, as if they weren't good enough to mix with the others. The party was full of children Skylar's age and their parents, people I didn't know, but who clearly were part of Marcus and Tanisha's social circle. I sat in an isolated chair, watching my family interact naturally with these strangers, while completely ignoring me. It was as if I were invisible, as if my presence had no impact on the atmosphere of the celebration. When it came time to open gifts, Skylar went first to the main pile of presents. She opened a new bicycle that one of her friend's parents had given her, then a tablet from another family friend, then expensive clothes from Marcus and Tanisha's co-workers. Each gift was received with screams of joy and hugs for the givers. My gifts remained untouched on the corner table. After opening all the main presents, Skylar seemed satisfied and ready to move on to the cake. It was then that Marcus, almost as an afterthought, pointed to my table. "Skylar, don't forget Grandma Rosa's gifts over there." The way he said it made it clear that my gifts were an obligation, not a pleasure. Skylar walked over to my table with visible reluctance, as if she were being forced to complete an unpleasant task. She opened the first package quickly, without the excitement she had shown for the other gifts. When she saw the first miniature horse, her reaction was lukewarm. "Oh, it's cute," she said without enthusiasm, and immediately set it aside to open the next package. One by one, she opened all my carefully wrapped packages with the same indifference. The dollhouse that had cost me $300 and months of savings was assembled and placed in a corner, forgotten as soon as she finished opening it. No one commented on how beautiful the dollhouse was. No one asked where I had bought it or how much it had cost. No one thanked me for the obvious effort I had put into choosing and wrapping each piece. It was as if my gifts were invisible, just like I was. But what happened next was what really opened my eyes to the reality of my situation. After Skylar finished opening my gifts, one of the other mothers approached the dollhouse and examined it closely. "Wow, this is beautiful," she said to Tanisha. "Where did you find something so detailed?" Tanisha looked at the dollhouse for a moment, then at me, and then back at the other mother. "Oh, I found it at a specialty store downtown. It took me weeks to find something this perfect for Skylar." She had taken credit for my gift. In front of everyone, Tanisha had claimed that she was the one who had chosen and bought the dollhouse I had spent months saving for. I sat there in my chair, speechless, watching my daughter-in-law receive compliments and admiration for my generosity. Other mothers gathered around the dollhouse, praising Tanisha's excellent taste and her dedication to finding the perfect gift. "You're such a thoughtful mother," one of them said. "Skylar is so lucky to have someone who pays such attention to her interests." Tanisha smiled and accepted all the praise as if it were her due. She never once mentioned that the gift had come from me. She never corrected the misunderstanding or gave me credit for anything. I wanted to say something. I wanted to stand up and clarify that I was the one who had bought that dollhouse, that I was the one who had spent months saving money and hours wrapping each piece with care. But I didn't say anything. I sat there in silence, swallowing my humiliation and watching my family steal not just my money, but also the recognition for my love and effort. That night, when I got home, I sat in my living room and finally admitted to myself what I had been denying for years. My family didn't just take my money. They took my dignity, my efforts, my love, and even the credit for my generosity. I was nothing more than a silent financial source that they could exploit without consequences. On Monday morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. I didn't cry during the night or lose sleep wondering if maybe I had overreacted to the graduation party events. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I had to do and how I was going to do it. I had a quiet breakfast while reviewing all the documents I had kept in my safe for the past 6 years. Loan contracts, bank transfer receipts, co-signer documents, receipts for payments I made on behalf of Marcus and Tanisha. It was impressive to see it all together. I had spent more than $52,000 in total to keep my family's financial life afloat. But what struck me most was a detail I had never noticed before. In many of the bank documents, there were annotations in Marcus's handwriting that I didn't remember seeing when I signed them. Small changes in amounts, additions of clauses I didn't remember agreeing to. I made the first call exactly at 9 a.m. I called lawyer Silas Jenkins, the attorney who had handled my husband Robert's will. Silas was 72 years old, but his mind was still sharp as a scalpel. In recent years, he had handled some minor matters for me, mainly related to my life insurance and some work contracts. "Good morning, Attorney Jenkins. This is Rosa Dupree. I need you to help me with an urgent family matter. I need to review all the legal implications of withdrawing my name as co-signer from my son's house mortgage." My voice sounded firmer than it had in months. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Silas had known Marcus since he was a child and knew how difficult my financial situation had been since Robert's death. "Rosa, are you sure you want to do this? Once you withdraw your co-signature, the bank may demand immediate payment of the total balance or proceed with foreclosure." "Exactly," I replied, with a calm that surprised me. "That's exactly what I want to happen." I briefly explained the events of the previous day without going into emotional details, sticking only to the concrete facts. Silas listened in silence, asking occasional questions about dates and amounts. "I understand your situation, Rosa. Let me review the original contracts and I'll tell you what options we have. Can you come to my office this afternoon at 3? I confirmed the appointment and hung up, feeling more alive than I had been in years. The second call was to the bank where Marcus and Tanisha had the mortgage. I asked to speak with the loan officer who handled the original case, a man named Mr. David Sterling, who knew my payment history as co-signer. "Mr. Sterling, I need information about the process of withdrawing as co-signer for the property on Elmwood Avenue." David sounded confused. For the past 3 years, I was the only one who always called when there were payment problems, the one who always found ways to cover the shortfalls. "Ms. Dupree, is there any problem with the loan? The payments are current this month." "There's no problem with the current payments," I explained calmly. "I just want to explore my legal options for withdrawing my responsibility as co-signer." David explained that it was technically possible, but would require Marcus and Tanisha to qualify for the loan on their own or find another co-signer. If they couldn't do either, the bank would have the right to demand payment of the total outstanding balance. "What's the current balance of the loan?" I asked, although I already had a rough idea. $147,000, Ms. Dupree. The amount impacted me, although it shouldn't have surprised me. Between the original mortgage, the cash-out refinances they had done, and the accumulated interest over years of irregular payments, the debt had grown considerably. "I understand. Could you send me a complete account statement and the documentation needed to initiate the co-signer withdrawal process?" David agreed, although I could detect concern in his voice. He was probably already calculating the chances of Marcus and Tanisha being able to handle this debt on their own. After I hung up the phone, I prepared a cup of coffee and sat in the living room to process what I had just set in motion. I didn't feel guilt or regret, just a strange sense of liberation, as if I had been carrying an enormous weight for years and finally gave myself permission to drop it. That afternoon, I met with Silas in his downtown office. He had reviewed all the documents I had given him and had some concerning news. "Rosa, I found some irregularities in these contracts that worry me. Some of the clauses and amounts don't match what you described to me about the original agreements." He showed me copies of the documents, pointing to specific sections. "These annotations here, in Marcus's handwriting, were added after you signed, and this amount here was changed from $5,000 to $8,000. My heart sank as I realized what Silas was telling me. "Are you saying that Marcus altered the contracts after I signed them?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And if that's the case, we're not just talking about withdrawing your co-signature. We're talking about fraud." Silas explained that document alteration was a serious crime, and that if we could prove Marcus had been systematically altering contracts and loan amounts, we would have grounds not only to withdraw my co-signature, but also to file criminal charges. But I need more evidence, Rosa. Do you have any other documents that might show a pattern of this behavior? I thought about all the receipts and contracts I had at home, all the times Marcus had asked me to sign papers quickly without giving me time to read them carefully. I think I have more documents at home, and I think I know people who might have seen Marcus doing similar things. Silas nodded seriously. Rosa, what we're uncovering here is much more serious than a family financial dispute. If Marcus has been systematically defrauding you, we need to document everything carefully. For the first time in years, I went to sleep with a smile on my face. But what I was about to discover would give me weapons they never imagined I possessed. 3 weeks after signing the papers with Silas, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was Marcus, and his voice sounded completely different from the last time we spoke. The casual confidence he always had when asking me for money or favors was gone. Now he sounded desperate and confused. Mom, we got a letter from the bank. They say you're going to withdraw your co-signature from our house. This must be a mistake, right? You would never do something like this without warning us first. His voice trembled slightly, and I could hear Tanisha screaming in the background about lawyers and lawsuits. It's not a mistake, Marcus. The letter is correct. My response was calm and direct. There was no need for long justifications or emotional explanations. The facts were clear enough on their own. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his accelerated breathing as he processed what I had just confirmed. Why would you do this, Mom? Is this because of what happened at the graduation party? It was just a child's prank. Marcus was trying to minimize the incident, turning it into innocent child's mischief instead of what it really was, a public humiliation orchestrated by adults. Of course, Marcus, children will be children. I'm fine with that. I kept my response short and neutral. Marcus, this has nothing to do with children's pranks. This has to do with the fact that for 6 years I've been financially responsible for a house where I'm not welcome, where I'm treated like a problem, where I'm allowed to be publicly humiliated without consequences. My voice was still calm, but there was a firmness in it that Marcus had never heard before. But Mom, this is our home. Skylar grew up here. You can't do this. Now there was real panic in his voice. He was finally understanding that his mother wasn't the manipulable woman he had known for all these years. This is the house I've been paying for 6 years, Marcus. A house you bought, remodeled, and enjoyed while I worked double shifts to cover the late payments. A house where you celebrated the kitchen inauguration I financed without even inviting me to see it. It's time for you to learn to be responsible for your own financial decisions. I hung up the phone before he could respond. 5 minutes later, it rang again. This time it was Tanisha, and her tone was completely different from Marcus's. Where he showed panic, she showed pure anger. Rosa, how dare you do this? We are your family. You can't let Skylar lose her home because of an old woman's tantrum. Her voice was venomous, full of that hostility she had always kept poorly hidden under a facade of forced courtesy. Tanisha, you decided I have no place in that family. Now you're going to find out what it's like to live without my financial support. My response infuriated her even more. You're a bitter, selfish old woman. We always knew you were like this, but now you're proving it. You're going to destroy your own granddaughter's life out of revenge. Tanisha was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. The only person who's going to destroy Skylar's life is her parents, who preferred to spend money they didn't have instead of teaching her to respect her grandmother. I hung up again, and this time I unplugged the landline. In the following days, they tried every strategy to make me change my mind. Marcus showed up at my work, waiting for me in the parking lot with red eyes and looking like he hadn't slept in days. Mom, please, let's talk like adults. I know you're hurt about what happened, but this is going too far. We can fix things. Marcus, for 6 years I acted like an adult, working overtime to keep your house while you treated me like I was invisible. Now it's your turn to act like an adult and face the consequences of your actions. I didn't stop to hear his response. I simply walked to my car and drove away. The next tactic was sending Skylar. One afternoon, when I arrived home from work, I found my granddaughter sitting on the steps of my building in her school uniform, dirty and with tears in her eyes. She had walked 12 blocks from her school to my apartment, something her parents would never have allowed her to do under normal circumstances. "Grandma Rosa, Mom said you're going to make us lose our house. Is it true?" Her little eyes were red from crying, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt in my chest. But then I remembered how those same eyes had looked at me with contempt while she poured tomato sauce on my dress. "Skylar, tell your mother that adults make adult decisions. This situation is not your responsibility." I walked her back to her house, staying firm despite her tears and innocent questions about why Grandma wasn't helping them anymore. When we arrived, Marcus and Tanisha were waiting at the door with expressions that alternated between hope and anger. "Mom, look what you're doing to Skylar. Is this what you want? To see your granddaughter suffer?" Marcus pointed at Skylar, who was clinging to Tanisha's leg and sobbing. "What I don't want is to see my granddaughter grow up thinking it's okay to disrespect elders because her parents allow it. Skylar is suffering because you're using her as an emotional pawn instead of teaching her that actions have consequences." My words cut through the air like broken glass. That night, someone scratched my car. They had used a key or some sharp object to scrawl "selfish" in large letters on the driver's door. They had also flattened all 4 tires. When I called the police to report the vandalism, the officer who took the report asked if I had any suspicions about who might have done it. "I have some ideas, but I can't prove it," I replied honestly. The officer nodded with understanding. He had probably seen similar cases of family disputes that escalated to acts of vandalism. "Ma'am, I recommend installing security cameras if possible. Cases like these tend to get worse before they get better." His words turned out to be prophetic. The next week, someone put rotten eggs on my door. Then, balloons filled with red paint exploded against my windows. Each incident was small enough that the police couldn't do much, but annoying enough to make it clear that someone wanted me to feel harassed in my own home. Marcus started showing up at the places where I worked, waiting for me outside the offices I cleaned at night. "Mom, this is ridiculous. We're family. Families don't destroy each other over misunderstandings." But he didn't sound pleading anymore. Now there was a subtle threat in his voice, an implication that things could get worse if I didn't cooperate. "Marcus, families also don't humiliate their mothers in front of strangers," I replied one night when he intercepted me in the parking lot of a commercial building. "If you really want to fix this, you can start by apologizing properly and showing that you understand what you did wrong." "We already apologized. What more do you want?" His frustration was reaching the boiling point. "Marcus, you never apologized. What you did was minimize what happened and tell me it was my fault for being too sensitive." My response visibly enraged him. "Fine, I'm sorry. Are you happy now? Now get your name off the co-signature and stop destroying our lives." He shouted so loud that other employees came out of the building to see what was happening. "That's not an apology, Marcus. That's anger disguised as remorse. A real apology requires understanding why what you did was wrong and showing behavioral changes, not just saying words because you want something in return." I walked toward my car, leaving him shouting obscenities in the parking lot. That night, when I got home, I found all my car tires slashed and the windshield broken. This time there was no doubt that someone had significantly escalated the situation. The note stuck to my door confirmed it. "Last chance, you crazy old woman. Sign the papers or things will get worse." For the first time in weeks, I felt a moment of doubt. Had I gone too far? Was all this worth it just to prove a point? But then I remembered the laughter of my entire family while tomato sauce dripped from my dress. I remembered years of being treated like an ATM with legs. I remembered all the humiliations I had endured in silence. No, I hadn't gone too far. I was just getting started. The call that changed everything came on a Wednesday morning while I was having breakfast. It was Brenda Miller, the secretary who worked at the medical equipment office where Marcus had worked until 2 years ago. Brenda had been kind to me during the years Marcus worked there, always asking about my health when I occasionally visited him. As a fellow healthcare worker, she understood the challenges of our profession. "Mrs. Rosa, I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet in private? Her voice sounded nervous, as if she feared someone might be listening to the conversation. It's about Marcus and some documents I found when they were cleaning out the old company files. We agreed to meet that same afternoon at a small cafe near my apartment. Brenda arrived on time, carrying a manila folder she held against her chest as if it contained dangerous secrets. She sat across from me and ordered coffee with trembling hands before speaking. Mrs. Rosa, what I'm about to show you could get me in trouble, but I think you have the right to know. She opened the folder and pulled out several photocopied documents. When Marcus worked with us, he handled some of the equipment accounts and supplier invoices. We discovered these falsified bills he had been submitting to receive reimbursements for equipment that was never purchased. The papers she showed me were copies of invoices where Marcus's handwriting had been altered to increase the amounts. A 400 stethoscope bill was modified Tosho, 400. A 300 blood pressure monitor invoice, Wuschen, Getto 900. There were at least 20 different documents, each showing clear evidence of fraud. How much money did he take in total? I asked. My voice sounded strangely calm, considering the magnitude of what I was seeing. We estimate it was around $12,000 over a period of 8 months. The company owner never filed charges because Marcus was popular among the other employees and he didn't want to create problems. He just fired him and tried to keep everything quiet. Brenda looked at me with compassion, probably expecting me to react with shock and tears. Why did you decide to tell me this now, Brenda? It was a legitimate question. 2 years had passed since Marcus was fired. Because yesterday Marcus came to the office trying to convince the boss to give him a letter of recommendation. He said he needed to prove he was a trustworthy employee to get a bank loan. Brenda lowered her voice and leaned toward me. Mrs. Rosa, he also mentioned that you were being problematic and trying to sabotage his financial stability out of spite. That didn't sound like the woman I knew. The pieces began to fit together in my mind with crystal clarity. Marcus was desperate to get that letter of recommendation because he knew that without my co-signature, he needed to demonstrate stable income and financial reliability to keep the house. He was also trying to build a narrative where I was the irrational villain, setting the stage for when the mortgage situation became public. Can I keep copies of these documents? Brenda nodded and handed me the entire folder. There's more, Mrs. Rosa. I spoke with Patricia Washington, who worked in human resources when Marcus was employed. She told me Marcus was falsifying overtime on his time cards. We also discovered he was selling company equipment and pocketing the money. The picture that emerged of my son was completely different from the one I had held for all these years. He wasn't a young man who had bad luck with work. He was someone who was systematically committing fraud, stealing from his employers, and building his lifestyle based on lies and stolen money. That night, I called the first number Brenda had given me. It was Darren Scott, a construction supervisor who had worked directly with Marcus on medical equipment installations. Ms. Dupree, your son has serious honesty problems. I was the one who discovered he was stealing equipment and selling it online. When I confronted him, he threatened to accuse me of theft if I said anything. The second call was to Patricia Washington, who told me about the false overtime and also about something that chilled me to the bone. Marcus used to brag about how he had tricked his mother into co-signing for his house. He said you didn't really understand what you were signing and that it was easy to manipulate you because you were afraid of losing your family. Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Not only had I been a victim of financial fraud, but I had been a victim of calculated emotional manipulation. Marcus had used my love for him and my fear of loneliness to turn me into his personal financial guarantee. I made the third call to Leonard Bell, an accountant who had handled some of the construction company's accounts. Mrs. Rosa, Marcus asked me to falsify some income documents for him a few months ago. He offered me $600 to create statements showing income he never had. Of course I refused the offer, but I fear he found someone less scrupulous who agreed to do it. After those calls, I sat in my living room with all the documents spread out on the coffee table. It wasn't just my son who was deceiving me. It was an entire network of lies and fraud that went back years. The money I had sent them for emergencies was probably needed because Marcus lost jobs due to theft, not economic bad luck. But there was something else I discovered that made everything even worse. The next day, I visited my old supervisor at the clinic where I had worked as a nurse for 30 years. Dr. Helen Martinez had always been a friend and mentor, and I trusted her completely. "Rosa, I'm glad you came. I've been wanting to talk to you about something concerning." Dr. Martinez looked serious as she pulled out a file from her desk. "We've been receiving some unusual insurance claims under your name. Expensive procedures and treatments that don't match your medical history." She showed me the documents. Someone had been using my premium health insurance, the one I had earned through 30 years of nursing service, to cover medical procedures I had never received. The claims total over $15,000 in the past year. Cosmetic procedures, expensive tests, even some treatments that were performed on people much younger than you. My heart sank as I realized what had happened. Tanisha had been using my insurance for her cosmetic procedures and probably for other family members too. "Dr. Martinez, I never authorized any of these procedures. Someone has been using my insurance fraudulently. I suspected as much. Rosa, this is serious. Insurance fraud is a federal crime. We need to report this immediately." That afternoon, I had all the pieces of the puzzle. Marcus wasn't just a son who had made some mistakes. He was a systematic criminal who had been defrauding employers, stealing equipment, and using my name and credentials for financial gain. Tanisha wasn't just a difficult daughter-in-law. She was an accomplice who had been stealing my medical benefits while posting about healthy living on her social media. And I wasn't just a mother who had been taken advantage of. I was a victim of organized fraud that had been going on for years. But now I had something they never expected me to have. Evidence. Documented, legal, irrefutable evidence. And Marcus, he had no idea what was coming. At what point would you have said, "Enough is enough"? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. The intimidation started 3 days after I signed the papers with my lawyer, Silas Jenkins, to withdraw my co-signature from the house. My phone began ringing at 6 a.m. It was Marcus, and his voice sounded completely different from the last time we spoke. The casual confidence he always had when asking me for money or favors was gone. Now he sounded desperate and confused. "Mom, we got a letter from the bank. They say you're going to withdraw your co-signature from our house. This must be a mistake, right? You would never do something like this without warning us first." His voice trembled slightly, and I could hear Tanisha screaming in the background about lawyers and lawsuits. "It's not a mistake, Marcus. The letter is correct." My response was calm and direct. There was no need for long justifications or emotional explanations. The facts were clear enough on their own. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his accelerated breathing as he processed what I had just confirmed. "Why would you do this, Mom? Is this because of what happened at the graduation party? It was just a child's prank." Marcus was trying to minimize the incident, turning it into innocent child's mischief instead of what it really was, a public humiliation orchestrated by adults. "Of course, Marcus. Children will be children. I'm fine with that." I kept my response short and neutral. "Marcus, this has nothing to do with children's pranks. This has to do with the fact that for 6 years I've been financially responsible for a house where I'm not welcome, where I'm treated like a problem, where I'm allowed to be publicly humiliated without consequences." My voice was still calm, but there was a firmness in it that Marcus had never heard before. "But Mom, this is our home. Skylar grew up here. You can't do this." Now there was real panic in his voice. He was finally understanding that his mother wasn't the manipulable woman he had known for all these years. "This is the house I've been paying for 6 years, Marcus. A house you bought, remodeled, and enjoyed while I worked double shifts to cover the late payments. A house where you celebrated the kitchen inauguration I financed without even inviting me to see it. It's time for you to learn to be responsible for your own financial decisions." I hung up the phone before he could respond. 5 minutes later, it rang again. This time it was Tanisha, and her tone was completely different from Marcus's. Where he showed panic, she showed pure anger. "Rosa, how dare you do this? We are your family. You can't let Skylar lose her home because of an old woman's tantrum." Her voice was venomous, full of that hostility she had always kept poorly hidden under a facade of forced courtesy. "Tanisha, you decided I have no place in that family. Now you're going to find out what it's like to live without my financial support." My response infuriated her even more. "You're a bitter, selfish old woman. We always knew you were like this, but now you're proving it. You're going to destroy your own granddaughter's life out of revenge." Tanisha was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. The only person who's going to destroy Skylar's life is her parents, who preferred to spend money they didn't have instead of teaching her to respect her grandmother. I hung up again, and this time I unplugged the landline. The subpoena arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was a formal lawsuit filed by Marcus and Tanisha against me, accusing me of malicious family abandonment and intentional destruction of family property. They had hired a lawyer named Arthur Trevino, apparently specializing in family disputes and elder manipulation cases. When I showed the documents to Silas, he laughed for the first time since he started handling my case. "Rosa, this is exactly what we expected them to do. By suing you, they've opened the door for us to present all the evidence we've compiled about Marcus's fraudulent activities. The lawsuit alleged that I had abused my position as co-signer to emotionally manipulate a young family and had used financial blackmail for personal revenge. According to the document, I was a confused and vindictive older woman who was destroying my granddaughter's stability due to irrational resentments. Silas, do they really think they're going to win this case?" The absurdity of their allegations seemed evident to me, but I knew the legal system sometimes worked in unpredictable ways. "Rosa, they don't expect to win this case. What they expect is to pressure you into getting scared and withdrawing your co-signer cancellation request before we go to trial. It's a legal intimidation tactic. But what they don't know," Silas organized all our documents on his desk, "is that we have enough evidence not only to defend ourselves, but to file a countersuit for fraud and restitution." The preparation for trial took 3 intensive weeks. Silas contacted Brenda Miller, Darren Scott, Patricia Washington, and Dr. Martinez as witnesses. He also obtained official documents from the bank showing all the payments I had made as co-signer over the past 6 years. A total of $28,600 in payments that Marcus and Tanisha had failed to cover. On the day of the trial, I arrived at the courthouse wearing my best black suit and carrying a briefcase with copies of all the evidence. Marcus and Tanisha sat on the other side of the courtroom with their lawyer, avoiding eye contact with me. Tanisha was wearing a conservative dress and a practiced victim expression, while Marcus looked tense and nervous. The judge was a woman about 55 years old named the Honorable Judge Evelyn Thorne. She had read all the pretrial documents and seemed to have little patience for cases she considered frivolous family disputes. Her first question was direct. "Mr. A. Trevino, explain to me exactly what Ms. Dupree violated by exercising her legal right to withdraw her co-signature from a mortgage loan." Marcus's lawyer stuttered for a moment before answering. "Your Honor, our position is that Ms. Dupree is using this legal right maliciously with the specific intent to cause emotional and financial harm to her family." "I understand your position, Mr. Trevino, but can you cite any legal precedent that establishes that exercising a legal right becomes illegal based on the person's emotional motivations?" The judge was clearly unimpressed with the plaintiff's arguments. When it was Silas's turn to present our defense, he began by showing the complete timeline of my financial support to Marcus and Tanisha. "Your Honor, Ms. Dupree is not acting out of malice. She is acting as any reasonable person would act after years of financial and emotional abuse." He presented copies of all the bank transfers I had made, all the mortgage payments I had covered, and all the loans I had given that were never repaid. The total amounted to $52,400 over 6 years. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have discovered evidence that Mr. Marcus Dupree has been involved in fraudulent activities that directly affected Ms. Dupree's ability to make informed financial decisions." Silas began presenting the falsified documents that Brenda had found, the sworn statements from Marcus's former co-workers, and the evidence that Marcus had been lying about his income and job stability for years. Marcus's lawyer stood up abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence is not relevant to the issue of mortgage co-signing. Judge Thorne looked at him with a stern expression. Mr. Trevino, you opened the door to the issue of character and motivations when you alleged that my client was acting maliciously. Mr. Marcus Dupree's prior conduct is absolutely relevant to establishing a pattern of dishonest behavior toward his mother. Brenda Miller was the first witness to testify. She spoke clearly and calmly about the fraudulent documents she had found, about the admissions Marcus had made about manipulating his mother, and about his recent attempt to obtain false letters of recommendation. Ms. Miller, did Mr. Marcus Dupree ever express remorse for defrauding his previous employer? Silas asked. No, sir. In fact, when I spoke with him last week, he told me his mother was a difficult woman who didn't understand how modern families work. He said she was being selfish for not continuing to support them financially. When Darren Scott testified about the equipment theft and the threats Marcus had made to him, I could see the judge's expression harden progressively. When Dr. Martinez testified about the insurance fraud, explaining how someone had used my nursing credentials to obtain expensive medical procedures, the judge took extensive notes. Dr. Martinez, in your professional opinion, how serious is this type of insurance fraud? Silas asked. Very serious. Using someone else's medical credentials to obtain procedures is a federal crime that can result in significant prison time. It also puts the credential holder at risk of losing their professional licenses and retirement benefits. The most impactful moment was when Silas called me to the witness stand. I had practiced my testimony for days, but when the time came to speak, the words flowed naturally. Your Honor, for 6 years I worked double shifts, emptied my savings, and mortgaged my financial future to support a family that treated me like I was invisible. I paid for vacations I wasn't invited to, for renovations I couldn't enjoy, for a house where my presence was tolerated but not wanted. I described the incident at Skylar's graduation party, the public humiliation I suffered, and the years of emotional abuse I had endured silently. Your Honor, the day my own granddaughter poured tomato sauce on me while my entire family laughed, I finally understood that it wasn't love that made me keep helping them. It was fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of admitting that the people I had sacrificed everything for didn't really want me. When Marcus's lawyer tried to cross-examine me, his questions focused on trying to paint me as a confused and vindictive older woman. Ms. Dupree, isn't it true that you're doing this out of spite because you felt offended at a family party? No, sir. I'm doing this because I finally understood that for years I was a victim of emotional and financial fraud. My son and his wife built their lifestyle based on lies and my money. And when I tried to set boundaries, they resorted to intimidation and vandalism. I presented the photos of the damage to my car, the written threats I had received, and testified about the intimidating behavior I had experienced. Your Honor, a mother who truly loves her family doesn't resort to intimidation when that family sets reasonable financial boundaries. When all the testimony was finished, the judge retired to deliberate for an hour. When she returned, her verdict was clear and unequivocal. This court finds that Ms. Rosa Dupree acted within her legal rights in withdrawing her co-signature from the mortgage loan in question. Furthermore, this court finds convincing evidence of a pattern of fraudulent and manipulative behavior on the part of Mr. Marcus Dupree toward his mother. The judge ordered that the lawsuit against me be dismissed completely. Additionally, she ordered that Marcus and Tanisha pay all my legal costs, a total of $4,500. She also issued a restraining order prohibiting them from contacting me or approaching my property for a full year. Mr. Marcus Dupree, this court warns that any future harassment or intimidation against your mother will result in criminal charges. Ms. Dupree has the right to live free from threats and manipulation, even when those threats come from members of her own family. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court is referring the evidence of insurance fraud and document falsification to the appropriate federal authorities for criminal investigation. Ms. Dupree, you may also wish to consult with the district attorney's office about filing additional charges. When I left the courthouse that afternoon, Silas shook my hand with a genuine smile. Rosa, you won more than a legal case today. You won your freedom. For the first time in 6 years, I felt completely free. If this story inspired you to set boundaries in your own life, smash that like button and tell me what boundaries you need to set. Your story might help someone else find their courage. 2 years have passed since the day of the trial. 2 years in which my life has changed in ways I never would have imagined possible. I'm sitting in the small cafe I opened with the money I was spending to keep Marcus and Tanisha's financial life afloat. Robert's Corner is named after my late husband, and every morning when I open the doors, I feel like he's here with me, proud of the woman I've finally become. The cafe is located downtown, in a space I rent for $900 per month, with the $1,500 that Marcus and Tanisha had to pay me in legal costs, plus the savings I had accumulated by no longer having to cover their expenses. I was able to make the necessary renovations and acquire the initial equipment. It's not a luxurious place, but it's mine. The walls are painted a warm cream color. There are plants in every corner, and soft jazz music creates a cozy atmosphere. I serve fresh coffee, homemade pastries that I bake every morning, and simple sandwiches for lunch. My regular customers include local office workers, college students, and elderly couples who come to enjoy a peaceful environment. Brenda Miller became my first part-time employee. After she testified on my behalf, she lost her job at the construction office because the boss feared retaliation from other corrupt employees. "Miss Rosa," she told me when I offered her the job, "working for you is an honor. I can finally work for someone who values honesty." The cafe generates enough income to cover my living expenses and allows me to save a small amount each month. It's not a fortune, but it's honest stability built with my own efforts, not with the manipulation of others. Every dollar that enters my cash register is clean, earned with hard work and fair dealing with my customers. My regular customers have become a kind of chosen family. There's Mrs. Hortensia, a 75-year-old lady who comes every Tuesday and Thursday for a latte and tells me about her grandchildren who live in another city. Unlike my experience with Skylar, Mrs. Hortensia talks about her grandchildren with genuine pride, and they call her regularly to ask how she's doing. There's also Mr. Manuel, a widowed man my age who comes every morning at 8 yo for breakfast before going to his part-time job at a bookstore. We've developed a friendship based on quiet conversations about books, movies, and life in general. There's no drama, no manipulation, just two adults who enjoy each other's company without toxic expectations. On weekends, I organize small events at the cafe: poetry reading nights, board game afternoons for seniors, and book exchange sessions. These events attract people who, like me, have discovered that true community is built on mutual respect and shared interests, not on forced family obligations. The restraining order against Marcus and Tanisha expired 6 months ago, but they haven't made any attempt to contact me. According to the few things I've heard from mutual acquaintances, they lost the house 3 months after the trial. The bank proceeded with foreclosure exactly as Silas had predicted, and they had to move to a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Marcus got a job at a landscaping company for minimum wage, the only job he could find after his fraud history became known in the local construction community. Tanisha had to get a full-time job at a supermarket to help cover basic expenses. Their lifestyle changed drastically, but they're finally living within their actual means, instead of depending on other people's money. The federal investigation that Judge Thorne had ordered resulted in Marcus being charged with insurance fraud and document falsification. He pleaded guilty to avoid a trial and received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and had to pay $18,000 in restitution to the insurance company. Tanisha was also charged as an accomplice for using my insurance fraudulently. She received 1 year of probation and had to pay $3,000 in fines. Both now have criminal records that will follow them for the rest of their lives, making it difficult to find good jobs or obtain credit. Information about Skylar occasionally reaches me through Mrs. Hortensia, who knows some of the mothers at the school where my granddaughter studies. Skylar has adapted to the change better than expected. Apparently, the experience of moving and seeing her parents work hard has taught her lessons about responsibility that she never learned when everything was easy for them. According to what I've heard, Skylar has become more serious and mature. She now helps with household chores, has learned to appreciate the value of money, and no longer takes things for granted the way she used to. 3 weeks ago, I saw Skylar from the window of my cafe. She was walking down the street with a friend, both in school uniforms, laughing about something one of them had said. She had grown and become a taller, more mature 14-year-old with a more serious but also more genuine expression. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. Skylar stopped and looked at me for several seconds. I could see recognition in her eyes, but also something that looked like understanding. It wasn't the defiant look of the girl who poured tomato sauce on me 2 years ago. It was the look of someone who had learned that actions have consequences and that respect is earned, not demanded. She raised her hand slightly, as if she were going to wave at me, but then continued walking. I don't hold any resentment towards Skylar. She was just a child being used by adults who didn't know how to teach her proper values. Now she's learning those values through direct experience, which is probably a better teacher than any sermon I could have given. Silas Jenkins visits me once a month, always ordering black coffee and one of my lemon cakes. "Rosa," he told me during his most recent visit, "you're a perfect example of why it's worth fighting for justice. You didn't just defend yourself, but you probably saved that family from continuing down a path that would have led them to much worse consequences." He's right. By forcing Marcus and Tanisha to face financial reality, I gave them the opportunity to build a life based on honesty instead of manipulation and fraud. It's a hard lesson, but one they needed to learn before their problems escalated and generated more serious legal consequences. My apartment feels different now. It's no longer a refuge where I hide from a family that mistreats me. It's my home, decorated with things I like, filled with books I enjoy reading, and visited by people who truly value my company. I have plants that I care for meticulously, paintings I chose because they make me smile, and a tranquility that comes from knowing that no one can manipulate my emotions to take my money. On Sundays, instead of sitting in uncomfortable family gatherings, I go to church at a small, predominantly black church near my house. After the service, I usually have lunch with other congregation members who have become true friends. They're people who know me as Rosa, the cafe owner, not as Rosa, the mother who can be financially exploited. This morning, while I was preparing coffee for another day of honest work, I looked at myself in the small mirror I have behind the counter. The woman looking back at me was 64 years old, with a few more wrinkles than 2 years ago, but eyes that shone with a confidence I hadn't seen in decades. I'm not rich. I don't have a large family to celebrate me on holidays. I don't have grandchildren who call me to tell me about school achievements, but I have something I didn't have for years: self-respect and control over my own life. The best revenge, as they say, is living well. And for the first time in my adult life, that's exactly what I'm doing. This afternoon, when I closed the cafe after another successful day, I noticed a familiar figure standing across the street. It was Marcus, thinner and in dirty work clothes, watching my cafe from a distance. He didn't approach. He didn't try to enter. He just stood there for a few minutes before moving on. In his eyes, I saw something I had never seen before: respect, maybe even a little pride. His mother, the woman he had underestimated for so many years, had built something of her own with her own hands. She was no longer the victim he could manipulate. She was an independent businesswoman who had found her own dignity. I locked the cafe door, turned off the lights, and walked home under the afternoon sun. Tomorrow would be another day of honest work, another day of living life on my own terms. And I couldn't be happier. 6 more months have passed, and this November morning I woke up to news that my cafe has been selected as Small Business of the Month by the local Chamber of Commerce. The recognition plaque will arrive next week, along with an article in the local newspaper that will include my photograph and the story of how a 64-year-old woman started her first business. The irony hasn't escaped me. For decades, no one in my family saw me as capable of achieving something significant on my own. I was just the older woman they could use to solve their financial problems. Now, Strangers recognize me as a successful entrepreneur who has contributed positively to the community. Brenda brought me my coffee this morning with a radiant smile. "Mrs. Rosa, my daughter asked me yesterday if you could give her tips on how to open her own bakery. She says you're her inspiration for older women who want to keep growing." I laughed when I heard that, remembering how many times Marcus and Tanisha had insinuated that I was too old to understand the modern world. The Chamber of Commerce recognition includes an invitation to speak at a seminar on entrepreneurship for seniors. Apparently, my story has inspired other people my age who believed it was too late to start something new. The coordinator of the event explained that there's a growing demand for stories like mine, stories of people who found their purpose after 60. Mr. Manuel has become more than a regular customer. In recent weeks, we've started taking walks in the park on Sundays after I close the cafe. Yesterday, he brought me wildflowers he had picked during his morning walk. A simple gesture, but full of genuine consideration. It's refreshing to be with someone who wants nothing from me except my company. "Rosa," he told me yesterday while we shared a slice of apple pie, "it's admirable how you built all this after what you went through with your family. We rarely talk about my previous situation, but when we do, he always refers to it with respect and understanding, never with pity or judgment. Last week, I decided to expand the cafe menu to include more elaborate homemade meals. I now serve stews, soups, and traditional dishes that I prepare every morning before opening. The demand has been so high that I'm thinking of hiring another part-time person to help in the kitchen. It's strange to think that less than 3 years ago, I worried about how to pay my own bills, and now I'm creating jobs for other people. The weekend events have also evolved. This Saturday we'll have our first story-sharing night where customers can share meaningful life experiences. The idea came up when Mrs. Hortensia mentioned that many seniors feel invisible in a society that mainly values youth. My cafe has become a space where life experiences are valued as wisdom, not discarded as irrelevance. Yesterday, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Darren Scott, the construction supervisor who had testified about Marcus's fraudulent activities. He wrote to tell me that Marcus had applied for a job at his new company, but had rejected the application due to his history. "Mrs. Rosa," the letter said, "I wanted you to know that your brave decision to expose the truth protected other employers from being defrauded. Your son needed to face real consequences to have any chance of changing." His words made me reflect on something I had been avoiding considering. Had my decision really been beneficial for Marcus in the long run? The answer, I believe, is yes. For years, my constant financial rescues taught him that he could escape the consequences of his actions. Now, for the first time in his adult life, he's experiencing the direct connection between decisions and results. Brenda told me she saw him last week working in the garden of a house in our neighborhood. He looked tired, but focused on his work, something she had never observed in him during the years he worked at the construction office. He seemed different, she told me, more serious, as if he finally understood that honest work requires honest effort. 2 weeks ago, while organizing old papers in my apartment, I found a family photograph they had taken on the Bahamas vacation I had paid for. In the image, Marcus, Tanisha, and Skylar were smiling radiantly on the beach, tanned and relaxed, with no indication that those vacations were financed by someone who wasn't welcome to join them. For the first time, I was able to look at that photograph without feeling pain. Instead, I felt a strange kind of satisfaction. Those were the last vacations financed with unearned money. Any future trips that family takes will be paid for with honest work and responsible planning. In a way, my refusal to continue being their unlimited financial source was the best gift I could have given them. The truth is that I feel happier and more complete now at 64 than I felt since my 20s. It's a different kind of happiness from what I sought for so many years. It doesn't depend on others' approval or feeling needed. It comes from within, from knowing that I built something valuable with my own hands and that I finally learned to respect myself. Tomorrow begins another day of work at my cafe. Another day serving people who value what I offer. Another day of living on my own terms. And that's exactly how it should be. You know what? I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your peace? What gave you the strength to finally say enough? Drop your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story gave you the courage to set some boundaries in your own life, hit that like button and let me know what boundaries you're ready to set. Sometimes we all need a little reminder that it's never too late to choose ourselves. What city are you listening from today? I love seeing where my stories are reaching people around the world. Let's connect in the comments. If you want to support more stories like Rosa's, stories about finding strength, setting boundaries, and rebuilding your life on your own terms, you can send a super thanks. It helps me keep bringing you these real-life stories that matter.